Hello, it's Rokita from Cosmic Bliss, and in this episode I'm going to explain how to use chords, melodies, and I'm going to show you some scales and keys. Choose piano roll. I often start writing my songs with chord progression, and that's why I'm going to explain chords first. Here you can see the most basic chords: major, minor, suspended. Actually it's suspended 2 and suspended 4, diminished, and augmented. Building those chords is actually pretty easy. As you can see, you have small bars on your piano roll, and to make, let's say, this chord, you choose some bar for your root note, so the first note. Then you skip one bar, and then you add another note, skip 4 bars, and add the last note. So let's try the major chord now. Note, skip 3 bars, note, skip 2 bars, and the last note. Right now you don't have to worry about choosing the black keys. I just want to show you how to make chords. So if you have the basic chords, you can try doing something more advanced. You can always add something. If you know how to make the basic chords, you can just play around and make something more advanced. But I think those chords are enough for now. And before we start with chord progressions, to show you how to use scales and keys. So here you have view and scale highlighting. There's so many scales you can use. There's probably more, and you really don't need to be afraid about this big list. This program shows you those scales, so you don't have to memorize them. Let's look at my favorite one. So now you can see the bright bars and the dark bars. It means that you can use those bright ones, and you should avoid those dark ones. The dark ones mean that you are out of the scale, and it's something for very experienced musicians. I don't trust myself enough to use the out of the scale notes, so let's stay with the bright notes. You can also choose key. You have different keys here. It's basically a list of notes that exist in the music. So let's take my favorite again, F. Changing keys basically moves the whole scale up and down, but let's use F right now. So how to make a chord progression? A chord progression is basically a sequence of chords that repeat, and I recommend using 3 to 6 chords per progression. The basic number is 4. If you remember from the previous episode, you have 4 for time signature. So that means you can have 4 simple chords, but of course you can have more or less. So let's make some random progression. Okay, so now we have some pretty dark progression. Here I used 4 chords, but it doesn't mean you can't, for example, make this one shorter and this one longer. Just experiment with those with chords and progressions to make something more unique than 4 chords per this bar. Well, of course, you can use 4 chords. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you see, you can make them shorter or longer, add more chords per progression. Let's do some melody. I will use this progression as the ghost notes mode. As you see, you have ghost channels and notes. That means you can't edit that, but you can see them in the background. There really isn't any rules how to make melodies. You have so much freedom here. I can just tell you some tips and advice. I recommend using, let's say, 80% of melody notes that belong to the chords, like this one, and around 20% of notes that aren't in the chord. The notes that aren't in the chord are good for adding some tension or some accents, and the notes that are in the chords are let's say the stable ones. And if you want to show that some part of the melody is important and tense, or the listener should pay attention to it, you can use the notes that aren't in your chord. And now I'm going to make some simple melody. Here I used some notes that don't belong to the chords, here in the middle and around the end of the progression. Maybe it's not some high quality melody, but I'm going to show you some real examples later. Well, that's not something I'm going to use in my real song, but it's just a simple example. So you can see where you can start making your own melodies. Let's do a similar thing, but in the different scale. So let's do something more common, like Lydian. Okay. I avoid the dark notes and make melody in the bright notes. The majority of the melody notes are in the chords, but some aren't. Of course, you're not going to just make some piano notes. You need something more. And let's go back to Hungarian minor scale and the key F. And let's see what can you do with this. I recommend using the melody somewhere around the fifth notes, because when you look at those numbers here, you can see that 0 is you can't even hear that. 1 is very low, 2 is also low. It's a place for bass notes. And now you have 3 and 4. It's a good place for things like guitars, some other instruments like cello, horns, or trombones, and the higher notes like 5, 6, 7 are good for the main melody, but of course it's not a rule, it's just a little advice. I recommend putting your chords into the background, like here in the ghost notes. And now you can turn the chords into some kind of arrangement. So the main goal.
Co ty robisz, Roxa?
So the main goal here is to use different instruments to play your chords. Let's add something in the bass. We use the middle note, move it to the lower frequency. Here in the bass frequencies, you don't need melodies or something very advanced. I even recommend keeping the bass as simple as possible. So we used those notes, and that means now we should use some of those notes. we have those. And now let's use this. It sounds quite terrible, but you see what I mean. You need to break your chord. Let's try again. You have to break your chord into smaller parts that you can use in different frequencies here. Basically, you should avoid very tight notes in your bass, but you can do the same here in the higher frequencies. I recommend making a few chord progressions and melodies that are kind of similar to each other, and then you can use them in different parts of your song. And now I'm going to show you some real example of my song. So this is my song. Here I used Hungarian minor and the F key. This channel has sound A off. There's no velocity. I just use this to see what kind of chords I'm using here. So let's take a look at melody. This melody fits the chord, but there are some notes that aren't in the chord. Here, this lower part is my guitar. Actually, it's a cello, but with distortion. Those notes are also a part of the chord. This doesn't matter. It just changes the articulation to tremolo. It notes an actual note. And here I have the bass notes. Honestly, I prefer using some kind of synth for my bass notes. Sometimes I use the real bass guitar synth, but I prefer something like this. As you see, it's very simple. It's in the very low frequency, like 2. One guitar is around the 3. Another guitar is around the 4. And the main melody is around 5. This part of the song is the intro. So as you can see, the melody from the intro, that harp, repeats here on the guitars. I have 2 bars of the similar melody. And the strings are too loud. I'm showing you a raw example. It's not mixed and mastered. So please don't pay attention to some kind of dry sound. And here I have some change. The guitars play a similar melody. And here I added some flute. Here I have a change in drums. The first melody repeats again. We've changed the drums. And this part, this is a pre-chorus. It introduces a new melody, and this melody will be important in the end of the song. Where is my time signature? That should be in 7/4. Okay, so this is the chorus. I have some ghost notes for the chords. And the chorus introduces another melody. The chords are similar to the verses, but it's a bit changed. So as you see, the main point here is to make something similar but kind of different, so the listeners won't get bored unless you're making some kind of ambient that's supposed to repeat all the time. This is where my chorus ends, and it has a post-chorus part here. So again, similar melody, but with different arrangement. This is the second verse. It's probably the same as the first, but it doesn't have a pre-chorus. The thing here is the chorus, but played by orchestral and synth instruments. So once again, similar melody but a different arrangement. And here, the ending of that epic part introduces drums. And some guitar here. The melody from the pre-chorus repeats here. The drums are changed a bit. And the ending is just the first progression from the verse. And this should be for also. So in the end, making songs really isn't that hard. You just need to learn some basics and then learn how to combine those basics and how to use them to make a coherent but not boring songs. So once again, I will explain the parts of the song. This is intro. Verse. Pre-chorus. Chorus. Here. Post-chorus. Another verse. That epic part that's kind of chorus but not exactly. The pre-chorus that's used as a part of the outro. And the first part of the verse that's used as an outro too. And while I make only instrumental songs, I'm going to explain how to write some basic lyrics. I used to write lyrics, but I got kind of burnt out. I used to do it for other bands and musicians, so I have some experience. And since I make epic, atmospheric, and melodic black metal, I decided to use only instrumentals. I really don't know why should I use lyrics here, but anyways, I'm going to show you how to do it in the next episode. Thanks for watching, and check the playlist in the links somewhere in the description or the comments.